This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with basketball coach Tony Miller. He discusses his work around individual development and the importance of opposition to make challenges game realistic, his dual role as an academic and practitioner, and how this helps him on the basketball court, as well as his content creation and the way he creates drills to support players remotely. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Perfect. So, Tony, first of all, I know I said this off air, but apologies about the delay there. Had some technical issues, like the X Factor, but we're here now, which is all good. How are things your end? All good?
Going well.
Perfect. So, as I said to you there, we kind of caught up a little bit. I think you've got your hands in a lot of different parts. I think really exciting as a host of a podcast, be able to talk to someone who's got loads of different avenues which they can discuss. It's quite wide ranging. But for people that maybe don't know you, don't know your background, don't know what you're involved with, do you just want to give, I guess, a brief overview of some of the projects you're involved with and how you've ended up there?
Yeah, so my primary job here is a university professor, and I've been here. This is my 15th year doing that. I oversee the sport management program, started that about 8 years ago, and then have just passed that off to someone else, but I still teach within the department. And then I am responsible for and started about 3 years ago our sport administration and coaching master's program. And so I oversee kind of the development of those and some of the primary courses for that and facilitate that as well. So coaching and sport is really where my passion is, and helping train the next generation of coaches. I really enjoy that as well, and do that at the master's level and then also at the undergraduate level. And then I'm also the assistant men's basketball coach for the university here, Bob Jones University. We're in Greenville, South Carolina, and we are currently a provisional Division III school, so trying to kind of work our way into that. And then you also mentioned the podcast. I do the podcast, and people say, "Man, how do you have time for all of that?" And I've been fortunate to really kind of have overlapping responsibilities and duties, and one complements the other. And I always wanted to be a teacher who didn't just have book knowledge, but really experienced the things that I was teaching. And so aspects of sport marketing and coaching. And it's been very helpful for me to be able to get those real life experiences and be able to then walk into the classroom and say, not just like, this is what the book says, but this is what I experienced. And, working with sponsorships, like this is how you secure a sponsorship. I remember last year I walked into a class and said, I actually last night just had a conversation with a sponsor and was able to talk about. And so it allows me to kind of like bring world life experience into the classroom. And then also the experience that I have, knowledge that I have from the classroom, I'm able to kind of take it then into the gym and kind of use it on my players and practice and work through it, that kind of thing. So like I said, just been very fortunate to kind of live in the world of sports and the administration of sports and sport marketing, and had classroom experience and the practical experience that has proved to be invaluable for me personally.
Perfect. So I guess the first question is, what drew you to sports in the first place? Why was that the place where you wanted to have an impact and career moving forward?
Yeah, I played youth sports and all the sports really, and enjoyed that and had great experiences, and wasn't necessarily always on great teams, but just had really great experiences participating in youth sports, and worked that way up through the secondary level. And then college sports, actually the college that I'm at now is where I attended, and we didn't have intercollegiate sports at the time. And so, I played some sports here, but really thought I was going to go on and become a PE teacher at a secondary school. And other plans, kind of just timing of faculty members retiring here, and was asked to stay on. And then, like I said, kind of over the years that progressed to is when the fields of exercise science, and which is more of like the science side of things, which my undergraduate degree had some of that in it, but then also the kind of the administration side of it and the sport management side of it had a little bit of that as well. And one of the stipulations was if I was going to continue to teach here, then I need to go on and get additional degrees in that. So I had a master's degree in secondary education, which was more for like teaching classroom at the high school level. And then when I stayed on, I ended up getting my doctorate in sport management and had an emphasis in leadership and concentration and coaching. And so, like I said, kind of like all of those passions and interests, kind of just one thing kind of led to the other and led me to the position that I'm in right now.
And in terms of, I guess, your skill set being quite vast, being able to, utilize yourself in a variety of different roles, and the university being able to do the same. How did you develop that skill set? How did you learn how to have your sponsorship hat on, to your marketing hat on, to your coaching hat on? Because they're, again, quite wide ranging, and it takes a lot of skills to be able to do all those things.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. I had parents that were both teachers and have just enjoyed learning and the learning process. And I think that's something that has served me well, especially as a coach and a teacher, is that mindset of just being a continual learner. And part of it was, again, just kind of like interests, passions of some of those other things, but been very fortunate for those all to kind of like diverge together. And it's very somewhat ironic, maybe, and also unique that I'm in a job teaching at a university where a lot of this day and age, like I read even over the weekend, education all the way down to some degree has been questioned, and to the degree of what is happening in the colleges and universities, and is it worth it to be able to go and that kind of thing. And I have been very fortunate to have a very worthwhile educational experience that encouraged me to continue to learn, but then also kind of developing in me that love of learning, and then trying to just be like just being inquisitive about other things. I hear some people say like, don't go to college. You can go get knowledge other places. And that's true. You can get a lot of knowledge other places, but the experiences that I had and the other things that I learned were very valuable to me in addition to that knowledge that I got from the university. And then being able to continue on after that. A lot of the things that I am doing with the podcast and with marketing, like I learned in a very informal way as well. And so I'm a testament to both sides of it, that going to school, going into education, teaching and education, but then also learning outside of it as well. And whether that's creating graphics or editing podcasts or, putting together some sort of sponsorship proposal, I learned to do all of those outside of a school setting. And so I am for learning in general. But like I said, if people are going to come to my classroom and learn, I want them to get things that they can apply immediately to real life settings. And I want to position them in places where they can continue to learn and grow in that knowledge and in that practical side of things so that they can have success outside of the classroom as well. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but hopefully it
Yeah,
did.
no, 100%. I guess what it does lead me on to is you mentioned a lot around, that thirst for knowledge, or that personal development side of both you having it, but also want to impart that on the people that you work with. So from your experience, what are some of the strategies or tactics to get individuals, one, engulfed and engaged within their learning, and two, trying to give them ownership around that, of going, actually, this is your journey. There's going to be things you're going to want to learn. I'm going to give you a push in the right direction, but ultimately it comes down to you. What type of strategies have you used around that?
Yeah, I think it starts with making sure that we're not just gaining additional knowledge for the sake of gaining additional knowledge. When I can position it in a way that they understand that this is to improve you, or to help you grow personally, or this will, position you better for the job that you have or that you want to have, or this will help you achieve those goals that you want to have. That's where it changes to, now we're not just gaining knowledge for the sake of gaining knowledge, but I have got to continue to improve in these areas or learn how to do this or whatever it is, whatever they're trying to achieve, because it will help me achieve my goals. And coming alongside them and saying to them, I'm here to help you achieve those goals. That's where you see others really buy into it, whether that's on the basketball court or in the classroom. When the student sees that I'm there to come alongside and help you reach those goals, that's when they're gonna listen to me. That's when they're going to take my advice. That's where they're going to come to me for questions. And so, I think that in large part has been some of the reason for the disconnect, because it's this: I'm here to give you knowledge. Now take all of my expertise. Now you go out and do it. And what I think is really what I'm here to do, which is, like I said, I'm here to give you knowledge and to give you examples and to show you, but how you take that information and then use it as you attempt to achieve your own personal goals. That's where I think that the success of what we're going to do with that information and how I'm now going to be able to have success in my own personal life, like that's where it's really going to happen.
And how do you go around, I guess, challenging individuals from, previous experiences of them getting somewhere, maybe via a different technique or different strategy, and pointing them and saying, well, this might help you more longer term. So if you use this in a sporting example, so if you're talking about a player that has a particular crossover or whatever that they're used on a basketball court, but you actually think, the higher up the levels they go, that's going to become less and less effective. So actually there's a small variation we can do that's going to allow you to maybe have increased success. But they're probably going to kick back and go, actually, I've got to where I am because of this being effective. So how do you manage that, I guess, challenging discourse around their development, and they want to make that next step, and understanding that you're not trying to hinder that, you are trying to help?
Yeah, one of the things that's been super helpful is just the more experience that you have, the more then I can go back and say, look at this person, or look what we accomplished, or look what this group accomplished when they did whatever the example is. But, the sports brings especially the team sports aspect, brings a very unique component to things, because now it's, excuse me, now it's how can I help this person not only achieve their goals, but also work to help the group achieve its goals. And it's one thing for me to say to somebody, like, if the group achieves its goals, then you'll achieve your goals. For somebody who maybe hasn't had that experience in the past, or hasn't had that personally happen to them, like, they may be a little hesitant to buy into that. But this is why film is a big part of what we do, talking about things that we've accomplished in the past when people have done this. Um, we use a phrase a lot, like, people and our players don't know what they don't know. And so just helping them understand, they may not be aware that, that new move or having this type of goal within our half court offense will help them achieve their own personal goals, or will help them become, a great example of that is the system of offense that we use. It generates a lot of scoring opportunities, especially shooting scoring opportunities, and has turned average shooters into above average shooters, and above average shooters into great shooters, not necessarily because their technique is better, but because of the types of shots that it generates. Well, because of the type of system that we play, it's not very common at the high school level. It's not very known with the players that we use. And so when they come into our system, I can say to them, like, our system will help you become a great shooter. You need to play within the system, though. That's one thing, but actually them buying into that and doing that, I'm going to have to show them film. I'm going to have to show them how it works, how it works at practice. I'm going to have to show them how the components of our system will help them become a better shooter. And that takes a lot of trust. It takes time. But I do think it helps, again, when we have a goal in mind and we help them see individually how achieving those personal goals will help the team achieve its goals, and vice versa.
And so obviously you guys on an annual basis will kind of refresh your playing pool, because naturally where people graduate and then you're bringing new players in. So do you have like a bulk of sessions that you will do with them at the start of the season to go over some key principles? And if yes, what are some of the key principles that you'll work through in this offense?
Yeah, so we have, for instance, this year we've got 5 new players coming in. but we also have a very good pool of upperclassmen as well who have been in the system before. Several of them who have only been in it for 1 or 2 years, but they have seen the success that we've been able to have when we play a certain way. And so within our offensive system are certain concepts and certain actions that everybody's going to have to know and understand. And because we play more of a conceptual offense, it really is contingent on, where does my teammate move with the ball? Okay, that determines then when I move next or where I move next. And so we've allowed them to have freedom, but also put in several different like constraints. But there's always an overarching goal of maintaining, for instance, within our offense, maintaining space and creating big advantages, small advantages that will then result in teammates being open shots being taken, et cetera, et cetera. So, coach just asked me this the other day, like, how do you go about teaching something like that? It really is introducing individual concepts, but then getting as quickly as possible to playing. And because of the nature of the sport, I mean, it has the potential to be very chaotic. And so it's like, how can I create this controlled chaos um, while still actually achieving what we want to achieve? And that takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of time. And what I found is it takes a very intentional effort on my part to become a better teacher of the game. Because if I can't communicate these somewhat obscure concepts to my players, they're not going to really be able to understand what we're trying to achieve. So um, that that may not sound like a lot, but if we want to dive into it, we can.
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing for me there is that you mentioned a little bit obscure concepts. I guess what's obscure about them and what led the head coach and yourself or collaboratively you guys to make a decision to go down this route?
Yeah, it's actually, I mean, it is simple, but it may to somebody watching it because we're not calling plays. Um, but it's not something that's like unique. We didn't come up with it. It hasn't been. It really follows more of the concepts that like even a soccer team would play. I mean, soccer is very um, reliant. Good soccer at the highest level is reliant on good spacing, good ball movement, and good player movement. And everybody will say that that's coaching basketball. People have said that for years. But what does that look like out on the court? And especially at the college level, so much of creating good ball movement, player movement, and spacing have really been in the coach's hands of drawing up the best play. And we go out and execute a play, and hopefully it gets us a good shot. And then we come down the court and we draw up another good play. But really, in the type of offense that we run, there's no plays. There's not plays being called. It really is concepts that as we run down the floor, we begin each possession in a certain alignment, and then based off where the defense is playing, based off of where the ball is passed, then there are subsequent player movements that will help generate additional space on the floor for the ball handler, so that that ball handler can attack that space and either create an advantage for himself or draw an additional defender, which then creates an open advantage, a big advantage for a teammate. And if the defense is good enough to rotate and try to take away that advantage, how can we continue to move the ball or move players to either maintain that advantage or then create a new advantage that will eventually open a shot for us? And so, there are some very intentional, like if the ball is passed here, then a player does run here, but it's not a play as in like one or two actions, quick hitters that hopefully we get a good shot. And if we don't get a good shot, then we need to call another play. So there at no point in the course of a single possession will the team come down and we'll call a play. And if that doesn't work, then we call another play. Everything is a coordinated movement based off of where the ball is thrown or a player moves to keep space so that then we can create those advantages and then hopefully create a scoring opportunity.
So I'm conscious of not trying to get you to divulge all your secrets here.
Sure.
But could you give us like a really common maybe pattern that you see offensively from your guys, and maybe talk through it with some technical jargon in terms of, if it's a high pick and roll or what that looks like. So when the point guard gets the ball, what's his initial thought as he's coming up the court, what's he surveying, what's he looking for, and then maybe what are the role of the individuals around that. Because I just think it would give a nice picture for people that are listening, both from a basketball context, if they do basketball, but also for me as someone that's maybe on the outside, I can begin to picture how the space and movement is created, and then maybe utilize that in my own head for what it might look like on a soccer field or rugby field or something like that.
Sure. I actually just did this with one of our players to help them kind of explain kind of what they're supposed to be looking up. And so, for instance, when our team gets the ball and we start now to transition to offense, alignment, as I just mentioned, was very important. So as we come down the floor, we want to already be aligned in particular spots, and based off of what your position is, will determine where you go and start and stand in that alignment. So if we're, for instance, a lot of teams here in the U.S. play either like a 5 out that are playing this way, play a 5 out, or they'll play a 4 out, 1 in, which means for the 4 out, 1 in, you have your one big post player, one of the post players running right to the front of the rim. And at some point they will, those that know the rules of basketball, you can't sit in the middle of the paint for more than 3 seconds, but they'll run to the rim and then hang around those blocks or the short corners. And then I've got 2 players in the deep corners. And then I've got what we call the slots, which are essentially like one step off the lane line extended. And so as you come down the floor, as if I'm the point guard, I am looking to see, is there an opportunity for me to go score the basketball? Because there is already created space because of how we start the alignment, that to my left, there is a single gap, which I don't want to drive into typically because there is usually a defender standing in that gap. Or to my right, there's a double gap that exists because if we go from the slot to the wing to the corner, I just listed 2 spots. So slot to wing is one gap, gap to corner is another one. There is space there for me to drive it and create an advantage. If the defense is playing me, well, and I can't exploit that space, then I'm looking to see, can I pass it ahead, either over the top to maybe my big man who's running down the floor and is in front of their defender, or can I throw it up the sideline to an open teammate ahead of me? If the defense is taking away both of those, then we cross the street. So we cross over the middle third of the court and look again to see it. Can I throw the ball ahead to an open teammate? And if none of those options are there, then we typically will set what we call a drag screen. So that last player who inbounded the ball is coming now behind trailing and setting a screen in transition. And screens are nothing more than are opportunities to create an advantage. And I didn't define this at the beginning, but an advantage is when my defender is no longer in between me and the basket. So if I can get the defender on my hip, then we have a small advantage. If I can blow by them and they're behind me now, that's a big advantage. We talk about big advantages. If there's a player open on the perimeter and nobody's guarding them, that's a big advantage. And so with in a ball screen situation, what are you trying to accomplish? I'm trying to go screen for the ball handler so that his defender is no longer between him and the basket. You are attempting to create a small advantage. Well, when you do that, defenses will attempt to then neutralize that action by maybe switching or hedging, or if they don't think that you can shoot, they'll drop into drop coverage. So anyways, we come off the screen, and when you come off that screen, there's now a triple gap that you can go drive. And so essentially what we're trying to do is just constantly create space and advantage opportunities so that we can either go score the basketball or draw help from somewhere and then pitch to that where help came from. And what we say is we get the dominoes falling. In other words, okay, the defender now has to rotate, and then that guy has to rotate for that guy. And we're hoping somewhere along the line, somebody either forgets to rotate or doesn't close out well, and we have an advantage to score the basketball.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice picture that you're painting there, and I'm thinking about it from a Man City perspective in soccer. You actually see it quite a lot with, those wide players deciding when to cut, maybe towards the goal, using a basketball term there, or maybe when the 10 goes into the post in that space, or when do they come out to then recycle the ball, etc. So I guess on the recycling side, how do you teach patience for your players within that? Because again, you're taking on a lot of information. Obviously, you guys have a shot clock which you have to adhere to, which you don't necessarily need to in a football perspective. But how do you teach them to actually, if it's not on, we're not going to force it. Feel free to come out and we'll recycle, reset, and go again. Or by you being patient, you're going to move a domino, and hopefully at some point, maybe in the fifth or sixth phase, someone will be half a step late or someone will fall asleep, and that will create the opening for us.
Yeah, so some that follow U.S. basketball, college basketball may know the name John Wooden. So John Wooden once, one of his quotes was, "Don't mistake activity for achievement." And that's one of the difficult things. I'll go back and, the illustration that you gave, even with football, with soccer, is one of the knocks. I remember when the MLS started, and one of the knocks that the people, when that first started, was it was basically boom ball, which was we boom it over the top, and you saw this mass of players, and whoever was the fastest was the one that got it, because it was just kicked over the top, and then it was kicked over the top. And there was kind of like this, you turn on a Premier League game and like there's beautiful spacing, and they let the ball do the work. And that's one of the things, if I can communicate to my players, it's not necessarily always movement of, similar to soccer. We don't all have to be running at the ball to create a scoring opportunity. We don't always have to be moving. There is this intentional, there should be these intentional overarching goals that, again, direct what we're doing. So I can't, for instance, maintain space if you, Michael, as you drive the basketball, I start randomly cutting, because what's going to result is I'm going to get in the way, my defender's going to get it in the way, and whatever space existed no longer exists, because now there's four of us in that space, where if I would have stood still, or maybe even take 2 steps to the left or 2 steps to the right, depending on what the situation is, I would have maintained or even created better space for you that would have forced my defender to maybe go help, which would, for instance, have led to a longer closeout. So you would have pitched me the ball and I would have had an even more open shot. And that's where I said, going back to the film and helping them understand that these overarching principles of spacing and drawing two defenders and then effective, efficient ball movement. That's one other thing that I think in all of sports, coaches for a long time have communicated this idea of like unselfishness. And we really don't even use the term selfish or unselfish with our players, because I don't necessarily feel that it's a, at least with the players, and I'm fortunate a lot, we recruit our players and that kind of thing, but I don't ever feel that I really have like selfish players. I have players who don't recognize when to pass the ball and when not to. And it can actually be detrimental for me to be unselfish sometimes. Like, what if I go to drive the basketball and I end up going by you, as you're my defender, Michael, and I go by you to score it, and there's a teammate open in the corner, but I have a wide open layup, and I throw the ball to you. That doesn't necessarily make it a good play. Like, the good play would have been for me to go and score it. Now, if your teammate had come off of you and come and guarded me, and now my teammate is open in the corner and I don't pass it to him, yeah, that could be selfishness. But in my opinion, like the way I'm describing that is, that's a bad read. That's a bad decision. And so there's really this goal of like making good decisions within our offense to create advantages, which is why you've heard me say the word advantage like 100 times already. Like that, I want them to be thinking about that and how we go about doing that. We go about doing that through spacing and ball movement and the correct player movement. I want them to be thinking about those goals rather than things like selfishness, unselfishness, running a Spain action or running a stagger screen. Like, those are all means to an end. Those are not running a good play or being selfish or unselfish. That's not what this is about.
And so there'll be certain players, I guess, within your system and nationwide that are higher performing than others. And they might have a particular matchup, or they might just be, you get it in every aspect, just better than the people that they're playing against. How do you manage that between the decision-making side, but then also allowing them to take over a game. If I look at someone like Kevin Durant, actually, he is an advantage by himself in the fact that he's however tall, athletic, really, really good ball handling, all those different skills that you could possibly have from an attacking point of view. He's got that. So how do you manage that between, yeah, we want to create our system and we want you to be involved in the system, but we also identify the fact that you are very skilled by yourself and there's going to be an element to this where, you know, we're going to allow you to flourish as an individual because we think actually you can't be guarded by anyone on that team.
I'm probably in the minority as a college basketball coach in the U.S. who really enjoys NBA basketball. I hear there's a lot of one-on-one and, it's not really a team game. I don't see it that way. I see it described in what I just said to you. And what you just beautifully said was those guys are advantage creators on their own. Like if this doesn't mean we don't take advantage of the examples you gave, like mismatches, like just because a defender is in between the basket and the guy that's guarding him doesn't mean there's not an advantage there. If it's Joel Embiid being guarded by Chris Paul, I don't care if Chris Paul's in between Joel Embiid in the post or not. Like Joel Embiid can catch it, turn around and shoot over the top of him and score on him. So, from the standpoint that you just gave with like Kevin Durant, a lot of people don't like professional sports, NBA, football, whatever, because they think that it's just this one-on-one, but that one can create their own advantage. If Messi is going against somebody who's significantly weaker than him, he's not going to pass it to an open teammate when he can himself create a one-on-one move that creates an advantage that then he can go score. And so it's more about educating players like, this is how we create advantages, and helping them understand, like, you have the ability to create this kind of advantage. Your teammate has the ability to create this kind of advantage because of his size or because of his ball handling skills or because of the fact that he can shoot it at such a high. And that's where coaches have for decades, like, getting players to buy into their roles. Okay, so how do we define those roles? I think it extends beyond like, you're a good shooter, you're not a good shooter. You're big, you're not. It really is communicating to them, you have the ability to create this kind of advantage because of these particular skill sets that you have. And once I can help them see, because of these skill sets, you have the ability to do this within our offense, they more likely then buy into those roles because it is clearly defined for them. This is how I can personally achieve success within our offense. And because I can personally do this, I don't have to try to do what this other player does because he has his own unique set of skills that allow him to create advantages as well. And that's where sometimes the conversations with my players, they think, I'm good at basketball, why don't you play me? And it's not, as a coach, it's not about like, usually it's not about you're good and you're not, especially at the college level where you have higher skilled players, and the gap between the best and the worst should hopefully be closer. It really is helping them understand, for me in basketball, how do the five guys on the floor best fit together, or who can I put on the floor within that five? And we do a lot of tracking, like, how does this group of five do together? How do, when these three guys play together, it goes great. When these two guys are on the floor at the same time, our offense is terrible. And that's where, for me as a coach, I have to pay attention to those things to make sure that I'm putting players in a potential opportunity for them to have the highest level of success. So I probably went about that a really long ways, but hopefully that kind of answers your question.
No, that's all good. The next question around that is, how do you help the individuals have a level of self-awareness of what their advantages are in comparison to the other team? Because again, you can talk about, as you mentioned there, you're kind of starting five or these two bigs together, etc. But there also will be an element of what the other team do will naturally affect how we can or can't play, or where we do or don't have success. If you go and play, a load of people that look like Shaq, you might struggle maybe with some of the shorter stuff, with the shorter players on the outside, but you're probably going to be pretty good at rebounding and dunking, all that type of stuff. Free throw percentage wouldn't be great. But how do you get them to have a level of self-awareness, both when they're on the court, but also when they're watching film, to say, okay, this is where I think, and this is who I think could get an advantage against their opponent, and here's why?
Yeah, I don't know if this is the order in which I want to present it, but just kind of thinking about some of the things that we use. This is why, analytics serves a really big part in our program, and we focus a lot on the four factors. So, how your effective field goal percentage, your free throw percentage, your defensive rebounding percentage, and your turnover percentage. Like, how do you do in those four categories? How do your skill sets allow you to have success in those four categories? And then based off of those four things, then obviously there's a lot of like sub skills and things that help you in becoming a great shooter or a great rebounder or a great free throw shooter or somebody who makes good decisions and doesn't turn the ball over. Or turnovers can be more than decision making. It could be skill level. So how do you do personally within those different categories? And then answering your question about like, from one night to the next, this is why, and this really shapes like what we do as far as our practices and our games and everything. um, one night you are playing one style or one person, especially the college level. It can potentially be very dramatic from one night or one game to the next, who and what you're playing at. In our league, we don't really play in a league. It would be hard to explain. I won't waste the time on the podcast, but we could very easily one night be playing a Division I team, and then the next night be playing a school that runs up and down the floor at a very different level, shoots a ton of threes. It changes from game to game, and coaches for a long time have said like, we just need game experience to get better. And I think all of us understand that. But what that has done for us very practically is we try to do a lot of playing in our practices, whether that is early on, it's a lot of 2-on-2 and 3-on-3. The 3-on-3 continues throughout the course of the season, but then a lot of 4-on-4, 5-on-5. And I don't necessarily mean like 10 minutes on the clock, play 5-on-5. I'm talking about like sometimes 3 possessions, or there's some other things that we do with that. But like, getting game reps so that they can get a lot of things in their brains about like what this looks like. What does it look like when I'm playing against somebody this big? What does it look like when I'm playing against somebody smaller? What does this look like? And then being self-aware to, these are the things that I can do to have success against this type of player. I think of one guy last year who, he thought, and this is part of coaching, understand, coaches, that like your players come to practice or come to your team with a set of expectations as to how they're going to contribute to your team. And those could be very different from what you as a coach have in your mind as being what they're going to do or what they need to do in order to contribute to your team. For one kid that may think like, I'm coming here to be a shooter, to them that may look like every time I touch the ball, I'm shooting it because I can shoot it. And for you, that may be like, no, I need you to make open shots, but only in these type of scenarios. Or you need to look for this because you're playing with 4 other players or with another player who really thrives if this happens. And you need to be able to recognize that. And instead of you just gunning a 3-point attempt, you need to throw it to that post player who's 7 foot and better than everybody else. Like, and so again, it goes back to like helping them understand what their role is in relationship to the team itself, and how can their unique set of skills contribute to the overall team's goals, and then allow us to have success as a group.
Yeah, I think it's really nice. It's a good opportunity for us to come on, I guess, to practice design a little bit as well. And obviously, as we mentioned earlier, you got a lot of stuff going on. And one of the things I noticed on your social media page was that you create a lot of content and sessions around things like Dr. Dish basketball, where they do a lot of stuff where people can then go and practice wherever they live, be that in a court or home or outside court or whatever. So I guess from an individual development standpoint, what kind of is your hit list if you're trying to help someone develop a skill or the technique or something you think actually for these young people to be practicing is more useful than taking 1,000 free throws or whatever it might be? What's your kind of hit list to ensure they're getting good quality sessions delivered for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main reasons with the Dr. Dish and the partnership that I have with them is shooting. I mean, everybody will tell you in this day and age, modern basketball, like shooting, if you can shoot, shooting is the skill of shooting is a premium. Like, if you can shoot, you'll probably have at least a chance to be able to play at the level that you want to play at. And so we do a ton of shooting in our practices. And we'll do a lot of like on-air shooting. We do some shooting with a defender coming out at you, but a lot of it has to do with just getting up a lot of reps in a short amount of time, and having our players do that. We require them to do that on their own, a certain amount of shots a week, and then we also do it in practice. If we have a 2-hour practice, we will probably for at least 20 minutes have a devoted time just to shooting. So that would probably be one of my top skills. Everybody's going to think dribble, pass as well, and yes, historically basketball coaches, especially at younger levels, have done passing probably not to the real advantage of their players. We stand in lines and we pass back and forth to each other, or we get fancy and combine two skills. We defensive slide while we're passing back and forth to each other down the floor, but that doesn't happen. That doesn't have direct game transfer. I'm not saying that's terrible. I'm saying like there's a better way, I think. Being able to pass with the defender so I know when to pass, where to pass. If his hands are here, then I pass around him. Anytime you move with the ball, you obviously have to dribble. So like, what does dribbling look like with a defender? And all of those go into why we practice a lot with the defender. Arguably the most important, the decision making piece. Being able to know when to dribble, where to dribble based off of how my defender closes out at me, knowing where to pass, like I mentioned before, based off of where a help defender comes from, or if a teammate is open, or if a post defender is denying my entry pass on the high side or on the low side, or when to shoot. Decision making, I think by more and more coaches now, is being thought of as a skill. And if it's a skill, then we need to train it. And so your original question about practice and what that looks like, there is a lot of introduction of a idea and relationship. Like, we show them how it relates to the whole, and then we will typically play early on. It's like I said, 1-on-1 or 2-on-2, but we'll typically play a 3-on-3, add constraints to it, whether that's constraining size of court or what needs to happen within the possession, whether that's like you have to have a post feed, or it has to start with this, or you have to have it touch 3 sides, or whatever. We play very, very quickly and have started with more 3-on-3 earlier and earlier, and it has led to faster comprehension and faster transfer to the games, because they understand the actual game context to the concepts and to the skills that we're teaching them early on in the year.
Perfect. So looking at it from an individual perspective, kind of at the start of that segment that you mentioned there, you said it kind of the high repetition stuff. So I'm not going to get you to do a 3-pointer because I think that's boring and everyone goes around that. But if you look at someone maybe for like a fadeaway, someone like DeMar DeRozan currently, who's very good in that space, probably one of the better players in the current generation, within that. How would you go around an individual, say it's an individual session that you're providing for a player that's going to go home for 2 months and you want them to work on this particular area? How would you set up an individual session for this person to develop that skill?
One of the advantages that we have at the college level is that versus like high school level, a lot of times here in the US, you get like an hour and a half or 2 hours at the high school level. And that's really about the only time that you see the kids and that you interact with them. Here at the college level, I will potentially have 1 or 2 small group workouts, whether that's one, me and them one-on-one working together, or, me working with 2 players. And that's where I can really focus on like individual skill development, and probably more so of like what coaches have thought of, whether that's footwork is a really big part of things. You talked about shooting form for, either a kind of a shot that you're fading away or evading a defender, finishing around the basket. What does that look like? Different types of finishing moves. So we will do a lot of like on air, slow it down. This is the footwork. This is the ball positioning. This is the movement. This is the, whatever. But then, like I said, we'll quickly get it to a defender. And that doesn't necessarily mean like defense and offense are going 100% full speed. But just introducing somebody standing there playing defense or whatever, so then they can quickly again put it into like a game context. So if it is a shooting situation, I will work with them on, their footwork into the position, the catch, where their eyes, again, vision is a big important part of it. So like eyes in seeing where a defender is, that will determine the type of shot that I need to take, and then where I need to transfer eyes for the shot itself. um, Body positioning in the air, common problem a lot of times shooting wise is what players are doing, especially if it's off the move. Is there an over rotation? Is there not enough getting an arm in line with the basket to create a situation where there are a few shooting errors? Follow through, that kind of thing. All the things that coaches have taught for years, beef, balance, elbow, eyes, follow through, or whatever acronym their favorite acronym is. But like all of those are still done during skill sessions. I'm just saying there is a faster transition into game context so that they can see this is how it fits in. I was talking with somebody just the other day about this, but I think one of the most common phrases that I've heard from coaches is something goes wrong in a game or something goes wrong in a scrimmage, and it's right after a session where we just worked on whatever that is, and the question by the coach is, we just worked on that, why did you do that, or something to that extent. And what you are saying is there is not a transfer. You didn't transfer as the player. You didn't transfer from the skill session that we just had to the game context. And I would challenge coaches by saying that's probably on you and not on them. And it's not that you did it wrong, it's just that they need more practice. They may need more feedback. They may need more reinforcement. They just may need more reps. But that transfer isn't there yet. That's what you need to go back and practice a little bit more.
I'm just going to loop back to the eyes bit that you mentioned there, which thought was really interesting. Obviously, there's a lot of work in football. It's called scanning quite a lot. For you guys, what does that actually look like? Maybe in that post space where you can have people around you, and it probably is quite chaotic. When are you trying to take on information regarding your opponent? When are you focusing where the ball is? When are you focusing towards the target? What does that look like, I guess, on a very generic scale for people in that space?
Yeah, I mean, it's dependent on like what you just described. Like, who am I talking to? What position are they playing? What should they be looking for? Probably some have heard with the research. I've heard like of the quiet eye. It's the football quarterback who, when the ball is hiked, knows exactly where to look and is not deterred by the 300-pound lineman that might be coming at him to the left or to the right. He can pick up which linebacker matters and which one may not for the route that he's chosen or for the routes that his wide receivers are running. What do I need to pay attention to? And for me as a basketball coach, it's that freshman, his first year, where I can tell there is nothing quiet about that eye, or more importantly, about that brain that's connected to that eye, because he's trying to bring in so many different stimuli. He's distracted by so many different stimuli that he doesn't know what matters and what doesn't. So in your example of the post player, before the catch, I should be both looking at my teammate on the perimeter who has the ball, but I should also be using my peripheral vision to see where my defender is. You talk about like factors that would depend that would factor into, even am I going to be able to catch it? Well, it goes more to things than just your eye. Like, where do I feel my defender? Is my defender on the low side? Is the defender on the high side? Is the defender playing me square in the back? Do I not feel a defender at all? That could clue me in as to where the defender might be or what he's going to try to do next. And then based off of those factors, we'll determine what post up move I use, or what move I know I'm going to use on the catch. For instance, if I have the defender on the high side, I'm going to make sure that I'm Xing big and wide, holding off. Hopefully you've been in the weight room and you can hold the defender off on the high side, but I'm looking to receive the ball here on my opposite hand. So on the catch, if the defender's on the high side, I know that I could potentially catch, leg whip, drop step, and score. If the defender's in the center of my back on the catch, I'm probably going to need to turn so that my butt's to the baseline. I'm going to need to get my front shoulder there into his chest, and then I'm going to either have to back him down, or once I feel him, then I spin off of him. And all of that takes a lot of time and a lot of work in individual sessions. But that doesn't come unless I have a defender. And that's why I say throwing in a defender at least is the least you can do. Otherwise, we're memorizing or just running through all these random reps. I can say to them, all right, on the catch, now drop step. All right, on the catch, go to the middle. All right, on the catch, spin, move, baseline, and reverse. All right, on the catch, face up and shoot. But what determines when I use those skills? What determines when I face up? What determines when I spin? What determines? The defender determines all of that. And so that's why we go as quickly as we can to at least getting a pad on somebody. That way they can start feeling, looking, and seeing, and then choosing the appropriate finishing move, so that then they can hopefully have success around the basket.
And the post probably fascinates me more than most areas, just because I think the crossover between a defender and striker in football is quite a thing. And I was a defender, so I like the idea of body contact and whatnot. So how do you get individuals to begin to understand the different ways that they can use and utilize their body? So correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I'd imagine if you're trying to spin baseline from maybe a higher position, that ability to plant your foot kind of be on the defender and then use your hip to kind of keep them out of the way and then be able to use your arm is probably quite a big important part of that. And I imagine for someone who's never done it, like I've never done it before, my footwork's probably going to be all over the place, and like the feeling of the hip of not knowing and making it obvious and stuff. So how do you actually get them to understand, one, what the steps are, and two, maybe if they're having success, why they're having success, if it's a foot placement, or if they're not having success of, okay, you're good for 3/4 of it, but actually you're not whipping your hip round quick enough, which is allowing him to slide back across. How do you get them to identify that? Is that through play, like you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, if I mean for a sport like basketball, for sure, um, through play, but slowing it down. I think slowing it down and then also allowing them to see it as well. I think we ignore the fact sometimes that not everyone learns the same kind of way. So I had, I have some players that I can literally just talk them through it, have them do it one time, and then we're good to go. I remember coaching one player early on where he was supposed to screen and then pivot a certain way in order to keep a defender from getting around him. And he literally kept pivoting the opposite direction. And I went up to him 3 times in a row and was, no, the other direction, no, the other direction, no, the other direction. And finally, on the last time I went up to him and grabbed his shoulders to help him, not in anger or anything, but I grabbed him by his shoulders, and he was literally pushing against me the same way that he was wanting to go, but I fought him a little bit and kind of twisted him the other way, and it was like a light bulb went off, like, oh, okay, I got it. And not a dumb player, it's just that like he's more of that kinesthetic tactile type learner that needs to be able to feel the right way to do it. And I think that's where, as a teacher, the great teachers will understand that people learn different ways, but oftentimes they learn the best if you get to them the way that they learn, but also like use those other techniques as well. So as I'm talking it through to them, I'm also showing it to them, or I'm also, sometimes I'll have them watch me do it, and then we'll have them come on, and now I'll do it as a defender. I'll be kind of like that dummy defender so that they can feel me, and as I come off, they're feeling how it feels like, and then we'll start to speed it up to game reps or whatever. And I think that's an important point for coaches, is that you live in this world where you have 15, 20, 30, 40, whatever years of experience, and you've seen the way that it's supposed to go, and the way. But for a younger player, like, they don't have that bank of, like, they understand what it even looks like or the concept that it should be. And so if you can kind of go back to thinking about, like, I was there once, I need to slow things down and help them and understand that even not every player kind of learns as fast or whatever. And being able to slow things down and understanding that each person's kind of running their own journey. But whether that means slowing it down, showing them a different way, understanding that we're all different in how we learn and the way in which we learn. And that should guide us as teachers then in how we communicate to our players.
Now, I'm not suggesting the number of staff when I say this, so, but yeah, bear with me on it. But do you think that's where maybe a crossover of what they do in the NFL would be useful? So, they obviously have position coaches, and about five of them, from my understanding, they have quality control positional coaches, all that type of stuff. And I can just imagine if you've got someone that maybe is an expert in that post game or attacking post game. I know there was a story of Tim Duncan a few years ago, kind of during the game, correcting his opponent, saying, "No, you didn't do this," which is why I was able to do it. And the opponent said, "I did it the next time, scored." And he went, "Much better," which during the game is a bit crazy. But I'd imagine if you've got someone who is a specialist in that space or has a really good in-depth knowledge from either playing or really focusing on that area. If you had that across the board, you're probably going to pick up little techniques and little skills that maybe you as a head coach or an assistant coach, you'd be spread too thin to be able to go in and talk about that specific technique. So do you think that's maybe where coaching in the future in those big programs could get to, where you have people that are really specialized at that particular skill and working with people in that area?
Professional sports for sure. Colleges here in the US are doing a better job with that. I think that's why you're seeing like a sports psychologist on the staff, or at least available to the athletes. And you're seeing strength and conditioning that have a basketball specific um, knowledge coming and being part of. I think of a school here in town that I know their program pretty well, and I've talked to and interviewed like their strength and conditioning coach, and I've gone and observed him. It's one thing to know how to lift weights. It's another thing to know how to train somebody to have explosive movements, to be able to rebound a basketball or to be able to stay in front of a defender as they move. And I think that that's where, going all the way back to I think it's on you as a coach. This may sound a little bit intimidating, but the more I can be a continual learner in body mechanics and sports psychology, you're going to be able to be more prepared for the kinds of things that you just described that will allow your players to tie together the mental, the physical, the movement. And I think will then allow them to be able to have more success than just teaching them how to play basketball. I think that's where a lot of us are saying, like, this isn't just about running the best play or working the hardest. Like, there's a lot of things that go into creating a great basketball player and creating a great basketball team. And the more equipped you are, the more equipped your staff is to handle those kinds of things. I think the more success you're going to see in developing players rather than just developing or just creating championship teams.
Perfect. And I've got one last question for you, which is, who is the most impressive player or coach you've worked with or against, and why?
Oh, um, I've been privileged, especially these last several years, to get connected with a lot just through the podcast. There's a couple that I think of. I think of somebody like Brian McCormick is one that with basketball that he has been kind of like forefront in player training, development, decision making. I saw a tweet this morning that reminded me like fake fundamentals, like the defensive slides or three-man weave, that kind of thing. Like just exposing like things that actually matter to sports and or to basketball and things that may not. Um, Somebody like Doug Novak has been really influential in helping me teach the game and that kind of thing. So I think probably just people who have helped make me better teachers, and there's a list of a lot of others as well. But I'm partial to that because I am a teacher, and that's what I do for a living. And so I'm always trying to find better ways to better teach, not just knowledge, but like we've been talking about, like real world application in our context, like this, what can we do to help players become better prepared for games and become better both individually and as a team. So probably those two, but there's probably more.
Perfect. Listen, Tony, really appreciate your time. I think a fascinating conversation into the coaching world and dynamics and whatnot, and hopefully can catch up with you again soon.
I appreciate it, Michael.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.